the recent interview between Richard Dawkins and Piers Morgan. I haven't watched it yet. I want to learn more about it. Richard Dawkins and Piers Morgan are leading thinkers, they're leading their respective fields. So it's interesting to see their discussion and, of course, to learn from it and give some commentary on the ideas. It's about religion and gender, two rather contentious issues. So we're going to be talking about that in this video. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Put it on 1.75 speed and let's get right into it.
Best-selling author, world-leading scientist, Richard Dawkins, one-on-one.
From London, this is Piers Morgan Uncensored.
Good evening from London. Welcome to a special edition of Piers Morgan Uncensored. I'll go head-to-head tonight with one of the most influential intellectuals there is. He's one of the most controversial thinkers on the planet. Biologist, controversialist, world-famous atheist. Richard Dawkins inspired millions by popularizing evolutionary biology, and his work on religion and morality has become a lightning rod for controversy.
I despise people who believe something without evidence and then go out and take action which damages other people.
His 2006 blockbuster, The God Delusion, made him a global face of atheism.
What's wrong with, in your opinion, with believing any God, regardless of who the God is?
I think it's false. I think that it's a matter of belief without evidence.
While his combative style has created fervent admirers and ferocious enemies. To his fans, he's the whip-smart scientist who's waging war for facts over feelings.
Science is interesting. If you don't agree, you can.
To his critics, he's incendiary, out of touch, and deliberately offensive. Well, tonight, he's here, and he's uncensored. Richard Dawkins joins me now. Richard Dawkins, thank you very much.
Now, before we start off, I want to like to say that I have great respect for Richard Dawkins. As a Christian, you might say, why do you have respect for someone who really dislikes religion? Well, I think the reason why I respect him is because he's a very honest person. He calls it as the way he sees it, and you have to respect that. He has no fear or favor to anyone. He's not pandering to a certain crowd. I think in society today, there's too many people going around and saying, well, all right, I want to please the leftist mob. I want to please the rightist mob. I want to please whatever it is, right? Richard Dawkins is like, I want to find the truth. And even if that truth is incorrect or I disagree with him on what he believes as truth, at least he's trying to present it and has the balls to present it. So I think that's something you can respect. And as anyone who is living in this world with critical thinking, that's the most important thing. I hope when you're watching my channel, I like to present all different viewpoints by interacting and interviewing different people. I may agree with them, I may not agree with them, but at least I try to present it and interact with their views. And I think that that is something that we could all learn from and can respect. And it's not about me saying, well, okay, he dislikes Christians, or I hate him. Maybe his presentation or his approach to Christianity could be a bit more respectful. I grant you that. But at the same time, I do also appreciate the idea that Richard Dawkins is standing up for the truth and standing up for what he believes is right. And that is something which I think is very admirable, and something which I just want to say from the start is, why do I respect him? That those are the reasons why I respect him, and he's standing up for what he believes is right and to present that discourse. And I think that that can only really be a good thing. So let's carry on with this watching of this video.
Indeed, for agreeing to appear on Piers Morgan Uncensored.
Pleasure.
I assume you will be uncensored.
Of course.
You've never been censored, have you?
No.
People have tried to censor you. I'm going to come to a bit of that later. This cancel culture has even come to your door. What do you make of that? People these days not wanting to hear opinions they don't like.
I think it's very sad. I think, especially in universities, where I spent all my life, universities are places where you should be free to speak your mind and listen, even to something that you don't like. And it's very tragic that universities seem to have bought into the idea that if you don't like what you think I'm going to hear from someone, you should shut them up and refuse to let them speak.
Yeah, and I find it completely baffling that at a place of education where the whole point is to test your own thought processes and to deliberately be exposed to other thoughts, we're now in a place where a lot of students feel they just don't want to hear it. They only want to hear stuff that validates their own opinion.
They use this word safe. They want to feel safe. And university is the one place where you should not feel safe.
Yes,
and this is something which I think is very true. And I share a background with Richard Dawkins. In fact, we both are at the University of Oxford. And as a result, when he's talking about the idea of cancel culture, especially even at the leading university, at Oxford University, that is something that you really have to be careful of. And it's something which is really negative to society, because both me and Richard Dawkins both were in that Oxford setup. And I am currently in that Oxford setup. I'm not sure whether Richard Dawkins is an emeritus professor or what his position is with the university. But what is clear and what is true is that there is a situation where universities, leading institutions at that, are trying to prevent free speech and free discourse, which is a very dangerous thing. And it's something that definitely has to be wrestled with and something which has to be fought against. Because at the end of the day, if we start canceling people in universities, if we prevent dialogue in areas where we need to learn, then well, that is going to take away from your learning experience, and that is going to take away from how you appreciate the world. And as a result, having that cordial dialogue, having that cordial discussion in these important educational institutions, well, that's the only way we can go forward. And if you're going to bring that cancel culture into those universities, then, well, you're going to have a very big problem ahead. And we're already beginning to see the dangers of that in society today, where you have people who are so bigoted, people who are so one-minded, especially people on the left or the far right, who just are unable to see the truth and are unable to appreciate different viewpoints. And that's just naturally the problem with these discussions. That's just a really big problem that we have to think about when we're thinking about cancel culture, is that you cannot let that into universities. Otherwise, that would always be a problem.
Dangerous.
Yes, exactly.
In terms of thinking,
Yes.
you know, I just think you want to be constantly challenged and provoked about what you believe and what you think.
You want to be physically safe, but
Yes.
intellectually you should be challenged.
I'm going to come more to this because I think the whole cancel culture, woke kind of world we live in is a fascinatingly disturbing one, and you've got strong views on it. But I want to start, because you're known as one of the world's big thinkers, I want to start with some big theme stuff. And I guess there's no bigger theme than...
Well, I definitely think that that's the case. And I think what he says is, well, there has to be freedom of thought and not freedom of physical violence. That what he's trying to say is, well, you should allow people to be safe, feel safe, so they're not going to get beaten up. But at the same time, they should be exposed to difficult ideas to wrestle with. And that is exactly the point of university, and that's something which is very important. Just a quick response to a question in the comments. Yes, I am in favor of free speech. I think freedom of speech is very important. People should have the right and the ability to discuss their ideas, no matter whether they're correct or wrong, no matter how airheaded they are or how rational they are. People should be able to present their ideas. And I think that via free speech and common discourse, people's rationalities would allow people to then get closer to the truth. And that is what's important. It's like the idea of the embodied logos is tied directly to the freedom of speech. And by restricting the speech, you're restricting the logos, and that would tie and take away from the value in the world. Let's carry on with the video.
Evolution itself. And I think I'll ask a question like this. What do we know now about where we've come from? And what don't we know?
Okay, we know once you've got a self-replicating entity, nowadays it's DNA, but it wasn't originally. Once you've got life started, once natural selection, Darwinian natural selection has got going, then we pretty much understand the 4 billion year history of what's given rise to us and all other living creatures. We don't know how it started. And that's still a mystery, and it may always be a mystery, because it happened a very long time ago, and we may never know exactly what did happen. We know the kind of thing it had to be.
What kind of thing do you think it was?
It was the origin of a self-replicating molecule, a molecule that makes copies of itself. DNA is such a molecule, but the original one was almost certainly not DNA, because DNA is it's been called a high-tech replicator. It had to be a precursor to DNA. Something, the laws of chemistry gave rise to a molecule which had this unusual property of making copies of itself, which mutated, changed in random ways, and that gave rise to competition between rival versions of it, and that gave rise to the whole panoply of life eventually.
Okay, so I'm a Catholic. I was raised a Catholic, so I'm a religious person, which I know is anathema to you, and we'll come to that. But my arguments with atheists, historically, have always come down to one thing, and maybe you've got an answer which will persuade me of the folly of my ways, which is this.
Now, before we carry on this, I would like to say that when it comes to evolution and things like that, I don't talk much about that on my channel. I don't know enough about it. But what I do want to say is that when it comes to this evolutionary debate, I think the evolutionary framework is very interesting when it comes to a lot of situations. For example, when you think about the development of ideas, development of certain objects, certain situations, evolution does help a lot, and it has a very great explanatory scope. But then now the only problem is, well, how big is that explanatory scope? And it kind of explain the full phenomenology of life. And when you're thinking about this, I'm thinking, well, when you're approaching life, you need to find a framework which has an explanatory scope, which can be a one-to-one match, or at least a very close one-to-one match to phenomenology. And if you cannot have that one-to-one match, and it's very far from it, then there is a very big problem with that framework. And that's the problem, the main problem I have with evolution, is that it doesn't fully explain the phenomenology of the human species. Yes, it can explain some of it, but it doesn't explain all of it, and not sufficient enough to provide a framework which has that one-to-one match. So that is a very big problem and worry I have about about evolution, is that it is an insufficient sample. I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm saying it's insufficient. There's two different things there. And furthermore, when Richard Dawkins is saying that, well, all right, it's coming from a lesser described or lesser developed thing, and it's being lesser developed organisms, and it's developing into a further kind of more complex organism. I think that's a good idea. But at the same time, we also have to recognize that there almost is this imbalance between the idea that if the very framework itself of natural selection is no longer about power, then you have a very big problem there. And what I mean is that, well, if you look at society today, especially the left and their kind of development into ideas, it's not necessarily the truth or the good thing which is being presented, but more so it's being the most the easiest one, what is most convenient, what's most easy to be developed. It's that view which is being presented, and that's a very dangerous thing. That's a very dangerous society, or a very dangerous precedent to set. And as a result, when the frame, and what I'm trying to develop with this example is that when the frameworks of your evolutionary development is no longer suited towards the truth, is no longer suited towards the good, well, then you can have very dangerous things coming out of it. So psychologically, there is a very dangerous thing that we have to keep our mind out for, is that we need to make sure that the standards of our discourse is aiming towards the truth, aiming towards what is good, and not some degenerate idea that we a lot of times see in society today. Let's carry on with the video.
What was there at the start?
We don't know. But I don't know, and you don't know.
But no human brain, unless you want to correct me, can actually comprehend nothingness, right?
No, but it's a fallacy to think that because I don't understand how it happened, therefore God did it. I mean, that's just weak.
Well, no, okay, but I'm prepared to have an open mind about this.
Yes.
But somebody did, and I just have never met a human brain that can explain to me what happened before. Say you go for the Big Bang argument. What was there before? What does nothing look like?
Physicists are debating this. I'm not a physicist, but they're debating it. My point is that they don't know, and I don't know, and you don't know, and it doesn't help to postulate a God that did it.
But you're certain it's not a God, and yet you admit you don't know.
No, I'm certain that it doesn't help to postulate something very complicated at the outset, because what we've got is primeval simplicity, and from that stems everything. And what science does, it starts with simplicity, which is relatively easy to understand, and from that it develops into the whole of the universe and the whole of life. It doesn't help to start with complexity, and a creator has to be complex.
But the reason that I subscribe to the theory there must be a more powerful being out there than anything the human race has created is because, like I say, a human brain can't comprehend nothingness or what may have come before nothingness. We're not able to extrapolate what that is, right? I mean, no scientist can explain nothingness, can they? Plausibly.
Well, maybe they can't. You'd have to talk to a physicist. But even
could you explain it?
No, I'm not a physicist. But
you're a very smart guy, and you're a very vehement atheist.
No, I'm not that vehement.
You're pretty vehement. I mean, you just think all belief in all gods is ludicrous, right?
I think that it doesn't help to introduce complexity at the outset. That's my point.
No, I get that. But
no, well, I don't think you do get it.
Well, no, I do, but you're asking me to consider that my own belief in a deity that may be above human thinking and understanding and brain power that was there universally, that my theory is scientifically flawed. Whereas I would throw back at you, okay, but I need to be given an alternative. I need some scientist somewhere to explain to me, right, 4 billion years, all right, but then what was there before that?
Well, scientists can't answer that, and what they say is things like it's like going north of the North Pole. I'm sure. I gather you recently introduced Stephen Hawking. He probably said that to you.
Yeah, he did actually. Yeah.
But the point is this: science can explain things starting with simplicity and working up to complexity.
No, I get that, but where science can't explain.
And I think this is a very big problem, not necessarily for either of them, but I think there is a fundamental problem with the universe, and I think a lot of recent kind of analysis has developed the idea that actually the universe was very complex at the beginning, and of course it depends on what you define as complex and simplicity. But if you look at the highly ordered nature of the universe in the past and how entropy is slowly developing into chaos, you almost have this idea that, well, of course it depends on what you mean by complexity, but the fact that the original state, the first state of the universe at T0 or T1, that state of the universe was actually highly complex, highly ordered. So that is definitely something which is very questionable. It's almost the idea that we are going from complexity to simplicity instead of the other way around. Because you think about what does it mean to be simple? Simple is something which is easily explainable, easily understood, or in fact easily analyzed. But if everything was at a state of heat death, well, that's a very simple state because, well, that's the same thing. It's the same state without energy, and you could describe the entire thing by its thermodynamics. It's a heat death universe. But if everything is complex, energy is in motion, energy is developing, energy is being converted, that's a very complex universe. So in some sense, the universe is going from complexity to simplicity. So there is almost this imbalance here, which is a bit different. And furthermore, when I think Piers Morgan here, and I think it's important to be fair on both sides, I think Piers Morgan is not understanding what Richard Dawkins is to say, well, the scientific method isn't necessarily about providing alternatives. The scientific method is there to provide possible hypotheses and then discuss the probability of those hypotheses and try to falsify. Of course, it depends on a lot of schools of scientific thought. I mean, someone like, do I have the book there? Karl Popper would say, let me get the book out. Someone like Karl Popper would say that science is about falsification. So this is a conjectures and refutation. I'm not sure whether the falsification theory is in that book, but essentially saying, well, science is about falsifying possible hypotheses and then getting closer to the truth. If you're accepting that framework, then you cannot actually do what Richard Dawkins is doing to say, well, God doesn't exist or there is no God, because then you have to falsify that proposition, which is very difficult. However, on the other hand, if you're just saying, well, we're just providing hypotheses, what's the most favorite hypotheses, then, well, it doesn't matter if you don't have an alternative, because what you're only trying to say is, well, all right, there's a few different possibilities. These are a few possibilities. Let's see how they are. So there definitely is that interchange there, which I don't think Piers Morgan is necessarily understanding very well. Let's carry on.
Explain something. I.e., in the case I just gave you, is it not possible that you're all wrong on the atheist side of the argument?
We could be all wrong. But
you might get a shocking surprise one day when you're no longer with us.
You might.
And you discover we were right all along.
It's possible.
You can see it's possible.
It's highly unlikely.
You don't know though, do you?
No, of course I don't. Scientists take a pride in admitting what they don't know. And they don't know what happened before the Big Bang. They don't even admit that the word before means anything with respect to the Big Bang. Physicists will tell you.
But it has to. I mean,
but it doesn't, because that's a naive statement. Physicists will say that you do not have to say there was a time began at the Big Bang is what some physicists will say.
Yeah, but to which I immediately respond with my basic human brain. Well, okay, if time began, when did it begin?
Well,
And what was there before?
Quite.
Which is a fairly obvious question.
It is a very obvious question. It's too obvious, and physicists will tell you that you're being naive.
Yeah, but they don't know why I'm being naive, because they can't provide
The human
any
brain
actual
is, as
scientific
you've just said, the human brain is not capable of grasping.
Right, that's my
these
point.
things.
So why is it not possible that there is a superior being, power, which many people believe in different
It's
ways?
possible there are fairies at the bottom of the garden, and all sorts of things are possible. You can't deny that.
Well, I said I've never seen fairies in the garden.
No, you've never seen God either.
No, but you don't know for sure that either doesn't exist.
No, I don't know that fairies don't exist. Fairies may be leprechauns, for all I know.
Do you accept? Have you got milder about this as you've got older?
Yes.
Have you got more accepting that you may be wrong? Less certain.
Well, yes, of course, a scientist may always be wrong, and that's definitely a thing that a scientist has to say. But I'm not vehement. You're provoking me to be vehement because you're taking that tone with me.
Well, you've been provoked before.
Yes.
And you've been quite vehement in response. I'm actually not trying to provoke you. I'm genuinely curious.
Yes.
Because I don't have all the answers, but I'm always skeptical of people who think they do. I don't think you do.
Absolutely not.
But your admission that you don't have all the answers to me is quite interesting, because it lends the possibility you might be wrong.
Well, it's not interesting. I mean, no scientist has all the answers. But the one thing you shouldn't say is that because I don't know, therefore God did it. That's
What do you think
how
happens when you die?
As Bertrand Russell.
Well, this is a very interesting idea. I think Piers Morgan is trying to push the guy a bit. It's quite funny, But I do think that Richard Dawkins is I think genuinely becoming a more scientific. I think when he was writing the God Delusion, all the stuff, it wasn't really presenting the truth, or it wasn't really something which I'm not sure whether he would still hold to all the stronger statements he's done in the past. He's presented in the past. But I think as time goes on, you realize the more he's falling back to a scientific perspective, the more humble he is and more honest he is, and that's always a very good thing I think for everyone to learn from. Is like you could recognize that you're wrong in a certain circumstance, and then you could develop from it. So that's a good idea.
Said, I believe that when I die, I shall rot, and nothing of my ego shall remain.
That's it.
Yes.
Yeah, nothing. There's nothing else.
How could it be otherwise? I mean, you have a brain, an evolved brain, which works by nerve impulses, and when that decays, what could possibly be left?
So you don't believe in, for example, a spirit or a soul? None of that that's all conditional entirely on a link to an actual cerebral.
Yes, if by spirit or soul you mean something that outlasts the brain, then I do not believe in it, no.
Really?
Well, how could I?
Well, people who've gone through weird sort of out-of-body, near-death experiences where they've been pronounced dead for a few minutes, they always almost all of them talk about this weird...
There's a tunnel of light at the end.
Yeah, so I mean, it could be, couldn't
it? Yes, well, read Susan Blackmore on that.
Would you like to be pleasantly surprised, or would you be appalled if you were wrong?
Well, I would be pleasantly surprised for a while. I don't think I'd like to live for all eternity, would you?
I don't know, it depends what it's like.
Well...
If eternity was watching, cricket at Lord's all day and watching Arsenal win every weekend, yes, give me that.
Really?
Well, if eternity is blissful and a wonderful experience, as some people believe.
I think there is something actually rather frightening about eternity, and I'd be quite glad to be spending it under general anaesthetic.
Do you fear, given the finality of what you think death to be, do you fear it as you get older? I
fear the process of dying, but when you're dead, you don't know anything. It's just like before you were born. I think it was Mark Twain said, I was dead for billions of years before I was born and never suffered the smallest inconvenience.
when you have loved ones who've died, for example.
That's tragic.
Yeah, but how do, as somebody who believes literally in the finality, the rotting of a body and that's it, it must be worse than for somebody like me, where I genuinely believe there's something better to come.
It's worse, so what?
Not so what, just curious. It must be for you awful each time, far worse than it is for people who have a belief.
Yes, it is.
A lot of people take great comfort from their belief in God, that there is a different life out there.
Yes, they do.
You don't have that sucker at all.
No.
So is it incredibly painful? More for you, perhaps, than somebody
I don't think
who
so.
is a believer?
Let me put it to you this way. If you really did believe it, wouldn't you say to the person on the deathbed, looking forward to seeing you in purgatory?
A lot of people say, looking forward to seeing you in another life, yeah.
Yes.
A lot of people say that.
You don't really believe it, though.
Actually, I do. Yeah, I do, actually. Because I find it, when I think about it in big picture, which is your great thing, I think, how likely is it that we just got put on this planet, Earth, as human beings, as a one-off kind of entity that existed here, and then you die and that's it? And it only lasted 4 billion years, and before that was absolutely nothing at all. How likely is that to have been the case? I don't think that's likely. My human brain, which is limited, does not think that is likely.
I think that's a very interesting point, and I think this underlies the fundamental essence of the dialogue and your disagreement is that, on one hand, Richard Dawkins is like, well, what can science and our empiricism tell us? And what Piers Morgan is saying, well, what is the existential view in which we can view life, which is most explanatory, which has the best explanatory scope? And both of them are different, and both of them are good, different, respectable approaches to this important question. And I just think that to understand that disagreement there is less so about what actually is the facts, but more so the different perspectives. One hand, Piers Morgan is saying, well, actually, what is the best, most satisfying existential solution of the phenomenology and the experience of being in the world? Whereas Richard Dawkins is like saying, well, I don't care. Let's just face it. Let's hard face the truth. And then the problem arises. It's like, actually, it's not scary. In fact, you almost fall into some form of nihilism in that situation. So it's a very interesting a contrast which you're seeing between the two thinkers and the two people. So that's a very interesting thing to note. Let's carry on with this video.
Very likely. It's exactly what happened, yes.
We are a tiny, tiny dot in the universe. Right?
Exactly.
So you don't know what else is out there, really, other than what scientists have already established.
No, I think it's highly likely that there are other beings out there which are much cleverer than we are. Superhuman, not supernatural, but superhuman. And I would love to meet them. I probably couldn't understand what they said.
Let's take a short break. I want to come back and I want to talk to you about where we are in the world right now, which I think we can reach points of agreement here about the cancel culture, wokery, and what it's doing to us as human beings. About Richard Dawkins after the break.
I'd just like to say I do quite like Piers
What about
Morgan.
Richard
He does
Dawkins?
have some fun
Recently,
stuff.
members of the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Language Project, funded by scientists in the US and Canada, produced a list of 24 harmful terms. These included male, female, man, woman, mother, and father. They recommended using phrases like sperm producing, egg producing, XYXX individual. And they should be used to avoid reinforcing.
Let's just face it, this is absolutely ridiculous.
Societally imposed ideas of a sex binary. To which your response was, the only possible response is contemptuous ridicule.
Yes.
Which I cheered, I have to say, because it was complete madness. How have we come to this?
English is my native language, it's your native language, and I propose to use it in the way that I have always used it, and I'm not going to be censored by. Have you looked at those people? I mean, they look like teenagers.
Well, it's just what's extraordinary to me is they want to, what they call degender and neutralize language, but they're doing it from a completely false pretext that you can somehow pretend biology doesn't exist, particularly when it comes to someone's sex. I mean, it's incontrovertible. There's no scientific doubt about this. And yet a small group of people have been quite successful, actually, in reshaping vast swathes of the way society talks and is allowed to talk.
It's bullying, and we've seen the way J.K. Rowling has been bullied, Kathleen Stock has been bullied. They've stood up to it, but it's very upsetting the way this tiny minority of people has managed to capture the discourse and to really talk arrant nonsense.
What's the answer to it?
Science. I mean, there are two sexes. You can talk about gender if you wish, and that's a subjective.
When people say there are 100 genders, for example.
Yeah, I'm not interested in that. As a biologist, there are two sexes, and that's all there is to it.
Now, this is a very interesting idea, and that's, of course, very true. It's like, I responded to a guy called Forrest Valkai previously. I completely destroyed his. I wouldn't say destroyed his argument, and his fans got quite annoyed. You can find the video on my channel somewhere, 2000 something views. Go and check it out. But essentially, what is being discussed here is the idea that on one hand, people are talking about kind of science, people are talking about biology, people are talking about gender, and the reality is that you can say whatever you want on the gender front, because if you can define gender as something that anyone could call whatever, then, well, there's no point discussing it. If I said, well, let's make truth what I like, well, all right, I'll make 1 + 1 = 3. If that's what gender is to you, then that's what gender is to you. Then, well, I'm a two-spirited, four-spirited penguin because that's who the hell I am. I don't really care, right? Gender is not something which is being discussed here. But when we're coming to science, well, science is a very important thing. And here's where I think Richard Dawkins himself falls on his own sword. It's like, well, he's saying, well, the only solution to this is science. I disagree. I say the only solution to this is religion. Because we have science ready. All the people who are proclaiming these gender stuff are normally the ones complaining about religious fundamentalists being flat earthers and stuff like that, right? You normally have that small group of people who are just like, oh, we like science, we love science, but let's have gender as well. Those liberal kind of atheistic, secular, leftist, science-loving, woke people who are promoting these, right? Most people, and I mean, it even says in this title, which as scientists suggest using man, scrapping using man, woman, mother, and father, you have that idea. Well, actually, if you turn it around, you then notice that, seriously, science isn't the solution to this. It seems like you need to have a more fundamental existential view on it, or a more phenomenological view on it, to say, well, actually, when you're using man, woman, mother, and father, and these kind of ideas, they have ontological significance, and they're not just some random idea that you're pulling out of nowhere. They're not just some idea that you can view from science. It has some fundamental significance. And if you accept that fundamental significance and that framework, then you have that way forward. And that's something which is important. So I don't think science is the solution to it. I really don't. And I think that the ones who suggest science will help is only going to hinder us in the future.
You had a Humanist Award stripped in 2021 because of your comments about this kind of thing. You had a tweet in April of that year. In 2015, you tweeted, Rachel Dolezal, a white chapter president in America of the NAACP, was vilified for identifying as black. She was white. Some men choose to identify as women. Some women choose to identify as men. You'll be vilified if you deny that they literally are what they identify as. Discuss. And all hell broke loose, and you had your award stripped because you were effectively doing what J.K. Rowling and others have said. You were just espousing a biological fact.
I wasn't even doing that. I was asking people to discuss. Discuss. That's what I've done all my life in universities.
Why have we lost that ability to actually have an open and frank debate?
There are people for whom the word discuss doesn't mean discuss. It means you've taken a position, which I hadn't. But anyway, I thought it was a reasonable thing to discuss. This was, on the one hand, I actually wrote a couple of follow-up articles to this. Race is actually a much more fluid concept than sex. For one thing, many people are of mixed race, so they really can be.
Well, I had my DNA done, for example,
yes.
Properly tested. It came back, I had 0 English DNA, 0. I actually have 6% Middle Eastern,
yes.
For example.
Yes.
Right? So that was a shock to me. I had no idea.
Yes.
A lot of Celt, a lot of Irish and Scottish and Welsh,
yes.
But no English whatsoever.
Yes. Well, we're all mixed, and therefore it actually is a perfectly reasonable thing for somebody to identify as some particular race if they want to. But sex is not like that. Sex really is binary, and therefore it's certainly worth discussing that odd anomaly, which I pointed out in that tweet.
I mean, we now have a situation where in women's sport, for example, transgender athletes are destroying women's records. and beating women in women's sport, by immeasurable distance.
We don't disagree about this. There's
No,
we don't,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me complete madness, just scientific madness that we're allowing this to happen.
It is.
One of the problems that scientists have, and we saw this in the COVID pandemic, is that scientists, by definition, they evolve positions according to changing facts. And we saw in the pandemic that originally the perceived scientific wisdom was that masks, for example, would be ineffective in preventing the spread of COVID. Then they changed their mind about that. We were told that the vaccines would stop passing on the virus, and it turned out that wasn't true. We were told, there's been a whole debate, as you know, about where the virus may have started. The belief was from a wet market. Maybe it was from this lab in Wuhan and so on. Those who are anti-science, they leap on these things and they say, well, there you go. Why should we believe or follow the science when they do such dramatic U-turns in a health crisis, for example? What do you say to that?
Well, it's true. I mean, science actually does change its mind, because I think it was John Maynard Keynes said, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir?
Yes.
And so this all happened in such a hurry. It was all a great rush to produce advice, and there wasn't time to take the normal balanced look at the evidence. And so naturally, they changed their mind. And it's a virtue of science, actually, that they can change their mind. Scientists can change their mind.
What is not a virtue is that social media allows large groups of people to whip each other up into a sort of lava of self-righteous certainty about positions, which can actually, in a pandemic, for example, be deadly to people.
I quite agree.
I mean, if
Well, that's definitely something which is very dangerous. And when people start, and I think what Richard Dawkins said was correct, is that science is there to figure out what are the facts at the time, do the right procedures, and figure out what can be demonstrated empirically. And I want to make the focus on empirical. However, if you're going to change that and take a step back, and you're like, all right, well, what is the situation, or well, what has to be the case, or this is the case. If you don't support me, then you're not supporting science and all these stupid stuff. Well, then you get dangerous discussion, you get disagreement, because, well, you're not going to get anywhere if you're just going to say, well, try to bash someone because they disagree with you, because there might be different countering evidence. It's like, not all things in this world is like clear, and not all the things in this world is like, all right, this is X, that's Y, that's Z. We know everything to 100% certainty. That's not the world we live in. So as a result, as humans in this world, it's very important that we recognize that lack of certainty and understand that we always have to develop, especially in the field of science, right? Fields of religion, other things, there can be a bit more certainty on certain issues. However, when it comes to science, there always is that room for improvement and room for development. Let's carry on.
Wrong types of people who are most vulnerable to, say, a COVID virus, if they believe this stuff and don't, for example, get what was pretty extensively seen to be a pretty safe vaccine in most cases, could kill them.
Yes.
What do you think about that new phenomenon in society, social media, creating these kind of
It is interesting.
rabbit holes?
It interests me a lot, actually, because there was a time when you could express your opinion by writing a letter to the newspaper, and chances are it would be not accepted by the editor.
But that was it. That was the only way you could communicate.
Now anybody can do it, and so it is actually possible for the sort of people who write graffiti on walls to reach the world if they get the.
Do you like social media?
No, I don't. On the whole, I use them, but I don't like them.
Why?
Because there's a culture of nastiness. There's a culture of hostility, a culture of outright rudeness. Has that always been there, and we're just seeing it manifest itself now because of social media? Or do you think the very nature of social media whips people up into be something that they're not normally? I think you wouldn't normally actually yell insults to somebody's face if you met them in the street, and that's in effect what's going on. It's partly fostered by anonymity. Many people don't use their own name on social media, so they call themselves Tinky Winky or something, and therefore they feel they can yell abuse at people without it rebounding on them.
Is it more important than ever that leaders, particularly political leaders of country?
And I think this is an interesting point, and it's why I often get into a bit of disagreements with a lot of atheists in my comments, and they get really angry at me, is that, like, I say the truth, I speak, I give my arguments, they might disagree with it, fine, that's prerogative, and then they start throwing insults around, like, you are clearly an idiot, you're a low life with some, of course I don't say it, but then if, I've always created a rule, like, in the past I got a bit more affected by comments in the comment section, but now I don't really care about it. If someone puts a rather sarcastic comment, I'll throw quite a funny sarcastic comment back at them, and then you go a bit of a back and forth, and after I ignore them, and then they get annoyed, and it's quite funny on my sides, right? I always deal I think I always do very well with it. I don't really get offended by the things. I try to tell them to respect. I tell them to promote that discussion, because I do know that people can get offended, and that not everyone is as thick-skinned as I am. You can throw insults at me all day. I don't really care too much about it. But the reality is a lot of people online on the YouTube comments are rather disrespectful to people. So it's important to be respectful, and I always promote that respect. And you'll never find any comment on my YouTube channel or on my blog, which you can go check out in the link below. It's www.joshuajwyen.com. There's a hyphen in between, or a dash, whatever you call that small line between the Josh and the yen.com. You can find it in the link below in the description. But essentially, no matter where you go, I always treat everyone with respect, even if people insult you. I treat them with respect. And of course, it is difficult at times, because the reality is a lot of times when people are annoyed on Instagram, it's very easy for people to get angry at each other. Oh, I'm right, you're right. Oh, you're stupid, you're an idiot. And it just goes on forever, right? It's important to understand the clash of heads is not always crazy. It's not always bad. If someone's trying to punch you, just ignore them, right? They're anonymous. They mean nothing. Relax, right? So don't worry about it. It's important to keep your cool head around you, even in tense situations. Let's carry on.
They pride themselves on veracity of their public statements. And is it really dangerous when you have social media and this kind of tribal nature of the following, that if you have people who literally don't tell the truth, but have huge positions of influence, that can be, for society, very fracturing and dangerous?
Yes, I think so. And I think you're perfectly right to focus on tribalism. It's been actually demonstrated that many of us believe what's good for our tribe, whether it's the left-wing tribe or the right-wing tribe, rather than looking at the evidence. And I think we need to train ourselves to get out of the tribal mindset and to look at the evidence as it is.
I mean, we've seen it with Brexit, we've seen it with Donald Trump, we've seen it with COVID, we've seen it just recently in the UK with Gary Lineker, this huge row about him, where his supporters, and I've been one of them, even though I didn't agree with what he said, his supporters have said this is about free speech. Those on the right, in the sort of conservative tribes, have all immediately said it's all about free speech, he should be fired for what he said, and yet you know that they would all be saying the opposite if it suited their tribe. And we saw that with, say, Jeremy Clarkson, where all the people baying for Lineker's blood defended Clarkson against demands for him to be fired, and similarly all those defending Gary Lineker, who's on the left and is considered a woke darling, they all wanted Clarkson fired. So I looked at these two stories and I thought, well, actually, I want them both to have the right to say what they want to say and be judged accordingly, but they shouldn't lose their jobs for honestly held opinions, however crass and offensive they may be.
I agree.
Do you think that's right?
I do, yes. I do. I think that we too readily fall into the tribal mindset of right versus left. And I rather admire Christopher Hitchens, late Christopher Hitchens, who was of the left and of the right as well, and you couldn't place him. And
I was editor of the Daily Mirror when we opposed the Iraq War, for example.
Yes.
And we opposed it very aggressively for several years. But I employed Christopher Hitchens in that period because he supported the Iraq War. And that was a surprising position for many people who supported Christopher Hitchens about why is he doing this? And actually, he argued his case with great verve and intellectual rigor as you'd expect. I didn't agree with him, but he argued it well.
I once said, if you're invited to debate against Christopher Hitchens, decline.
Let's take another short break. Professor Stephen Hawking told me shortly before he died that the biggest threat to mankind was artificial intelligence learning how to self-design. I'll play you that clip after the break and get your reaction. Still more from Richard Dawkins.
It's been a wonderful interview so far. Let's carry on watching it. I've been enjoying it. It's quite nice.
Richard Dawkins is still with me. So Richard, I had the great honour of doing one of the last interviews with Professor Stephen Hawking before he died, up at his office in Cambridge. And I asked him what I think is a pretty important question. Let's take a look. Is artificial intelligence going to be the end of us? And if it's not, how do we best work with it?
Ever since the start of the Industrial Revolution, there have been fears of mass unemployment as machines replaced humans. There is a greater danger from artificial intelligence if we allow it to become self-designing, for then it can improve itself rapidly, and we may lose control.
What do you think of that?
Well, I think that mass unemployment is one of the problems, but I think that in a way they might do a better job than we do. I mean, I could imagine in 1,000 years' time, perhaps there'd be nothing but robots who would look back on a kind of dawn age when there were...
But that means no humans.
Yes.
Why would you look forward to that?
No,
I suppose you don't care because you won't be here.
I wouldn't necessarily look forward to it. I think it's an interesting possibility that the future of humanity might lie in its artificial creations.
Really?
I'm not saying
It's stuff of a horror film, isn't it?
Yes. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, but isn't
I don't really look forward to it. I mean,
isn't it terrifying that can happen?
Yes, it is rather. Yes.
You think it's a possibility?
I think we've got a long way to go. I mean, he talked about self-reproducing robots, and that's a key. I think it was either von Neumann or Morgenstern, I forget which, who postulated this idea. I think it was von Neumann of a self-reproducing machine that could actually evolve. Well, I think we probably are on the threshold of a major breakthrough in artificial intelligence. I'm not that impressed, by the way, with the one that we're talking about now called
The Chat GPT.
Yeah, I had a go on that, and superficially impressive. But then I happened to mention Helen Spurway, who was the wife of J.B.S. Haldane, the great biologist, and it said later Helen Spurway married Richard Dawkins,
which she didn't, presumably.
She did not.
So it's inaccurate.
Yes, and many major factual errors of that sort.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things about ChatGPT is like some things are right and some things are a bit questionable, right? You don't know where it's getting its information from. But I think AI in general is a very interesting thing, and my good friend Warren is currently analyzing AI a bit more than I do. I don't know much about AI, so I suppose I could get him to talk about AI on my channel. However, when we're talking about this situation right now, I do think that there is a very difficult conflict going on. There's a very difficult kind of problem going on, and it's very important that we actually try to solve it, because at the end of the day, AI is something which can be a tool or something which can be dangerous. You have to figure out where that line is drawn and try to develop from it. It is how it is. You have to adapt to it. Unless you're in the power where you can do something about it, then of course you could figure out your thoughts, try to develop your thoughts, and then try to solve something. But that's not always the case. That might not be the case. So you have to find that balance here, and that balance is very important. Let's carry on.
But
this early days reminds me a little bit of when they used computers to play chess against the grandmasters. The grandmaster sent the computer packing, but then the computer got better and better and better. And now there's no human being who can beat the best computers at chess,
that's right.
or even come close.
Yeah.
So you have to assume that this chat thing, AI chat, is going to get progressively better. Right?
I think the problem is playing chess is one thing because it's a limited domain, and there've been other AIs that have worked on coloured bricks on this table. Put the blue one on top of the red one and then knock it over. It can do that. But a versatile AI,
a sentient AI is really what I think Hawking was
it's
talking about.
important to know whether it really is sentient. But Turing proposed, the mathematician Alan Turing proposed a test whether you could actually be fooled by it, and you probably will be fooled by it. I suppose I'm committed to the view that sentience must be, since I know that we have it, I know that I have it, I presume you have it. I think I'm committed to the view as a materialist, it must be in principle possible for a machine to be sentient. And
Hawking was of the view, Hawking was of the view, once that happens, it's all over for the human race.
Yes. I don't think it's all over for the human race. It could be, especially if it was self-reproducing.
You yourself compared Trump to Hitler.
Well, I think sentience is a very important thing. It's a very difficult thing to understand. Like, what is sentient? Of course, religious thinkers will have their own view. Sentience to religion is always going to be different to sentience, whatever it is, for atheists and materialists. It's something which has to be wrestled, something which has to be discussed, because reality is, when you're thinking about what is sentience in the world, I mean, you could say, well, it's our understanding, our knowing of self, our understanding of self. But that isn't really what we mean by sentience. A computer can think, well, I am a computer. That's a form of knowing itself. But is that really sentience? I'm not sure it is. It's almost this kind of enlightened, that conscious, that understanding. It's a mix of a lot of different things. So when we could classify something as sentient, it's something which is very questionable. I'm not sure. I mean, questionable, I'm not saying it's wrong. It's something which is hotly debated and something which has to be wrestled with. And that's something I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
These
did I? I would hesitate to compare anybody to Hitler.
Well, I think you said, in a way, you said national pride has evil consequences. Prefer pride in humanity. German pride gave us Hitler. American pride gave us Trump. British pride gave us Brexit. If you must have pride, be proud that Homo sapiens could produce a Darwin, Shakespeare, Mandela, Einstein, Beethoven. Yeah. So the implication was that pride leads into dark places.
But that's different from that. I agree with that. I stand by that. But I don't stand by comparing Trump to Hitler. I mean, they're both liars. But
is it always a mistake to evoke Hitler and the Nazis? And that's literally talking about people who killed millions of people.
Pretty nearly, yes. I mean, Hitler was such an outlier that I would hesitate to compare anybody to him in a full sense. I mean, you can compare in one sense, like Trump and Hitler are both mega liars. That's true enough. But I wouldn't go much further.
What are the other dangers, do you think, facing mankind?
Oh, well, nationalism, national pride.
Of the kind that we saw with the Nazis, where they literally want to take over the world.
Yes, and in a smaller way, we're seeing it with Putin. Obviously, climate change is one we have to worry about. Artificial intelligence is perhaps another one.
You said before that Islam, or fundamentalist Islam, is one of the great threats.
I think fundamentalist faith, where you believe absolutely that you're right without any evidence, is a major danger, because that licenses you to do anything. If you really, really sincerely believe that you've got right on your side because God told you, then really, I can sort of understand how the Inquisition mind worked and how the modern Islamist mind.
Would you be accused of being an Islamophobe? Are you? Or would you be taking the same view of the Christians back in the 16th century?
Well, I'm not an Islamophobe. What I'm a phobic about is clitoridectomy, of throwing gay people off buildings, banning dancing and music and having fun generally. I'm phobic about all those sorts of things, but that's different from being Islamophobe.
That's a very interesting thing, and I think that's correct. It's like, well, there has to be a line which is being drawn here. It's not to say, well, all right, us religious people have to say, well, we are right all the time. We have the word from God. That's not the case, right? Like, the entire idea of the religious concept is that we are trying to understand what God is. You're wrestling with a divine idea. So as a result, I think I share Richard Dawkins' kind of concern, is that when people consider they're right too much of the time, then you really have problems, and it's very important to avoid falling into those traps. So when you're thinking about the situation, it's very important that you do recognize that there is a massive gap between what you need to be, what you need to become, and also the idea that, well, actually reality is that there is a lot left unknown, or there's a lot that we are yet to know when it comes to the world and religion as well. So don't be a fundamentalist in the sense that, all right, we know absolutely everything. Everything we know is the word of God, and we are the representatives of God. That's a very dangerous line to follow. Even people who are greatly religious, who tried their whole life to understand God, don't even know a single speck of it. So don't even try to fall on the line of saying, well, I have the divine truth from God. That is just absolutely incorrect. I'm not saying that you don't have a divine source of wisdom like the Bible or stuff like that. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that don't fall into lack of critical thinking. You really should analyze things and really should struggle and wrestle with the idea of God. That's something which is natural in our conscious, and that's something we have to do as religious people, and responsibly as religious people.
Muslims are the biggest victim of Islamism.
Yes, they are. There's been a big debate about this ISIS bride, Shamima Begum, whether she should be allowed to come back to this country. Do you have a view about that?
I will not say.
You'd rather not say?
I haven't studied it enough.
Well, she was married to an ISIS fighter.
I know.
She was young, but she was 15 when she went out there.
Yes.
The debate really is, was she groomed to be part of this terror group in Syria? And as such, should we show mercy and allow her back to this country?
Yes, I'm not going to say about that.
Are you worried about, did you get threats because of the positions you've taken on some of these things? You saw what happened to Salman Rushdie. Didn't send a shutter through? You saying no, you don't want to talk about it? Or?
Yes.
Right. I mean, that's interesting in itself. Because there are areas which you would prefer not to discuss.
Yes. I should have said that before we started.
Yeah. No, listen, I think it's sad that you can't. I don't think anything should be off limits in interviews with people like you. The whole point of the world's smartest thinkers is we ought to be able to have free and open debate. But I don't think we do, because people use murderous retribution against free speech. Really what it amounts to, right?
Well, I'm passionately in favour of free speech.
Should there ever be limits to free speech?
Yes, I mean, incitement to violence. That's the normal answer, and I think it's a good.
But outside of that, people should be free to...
I think so, yes.
Have you noticed...
I agree with that, and it's really sad, and I share on both their sentiments. So there are genuinely things that I don't say online there's generally things I'm sure Richard Dawkins don't say a lot. And just because there are consequences to what we say, right? I know I do say quite a lot on this YouTube channel and on my other platforms as well, but the reality is I do hold a lot of opinions back just because I don't want to get into trouble with my university and stuff like that, right? So there are things that I don't do and I will not do on this channel. Now, before we carry on this video, however, I would like to remind that if you do want to support our channel, you can, of course, check us out on our socials, on our Instagram, or our Twitter. We do promote stuff there. Links to that will be in the description below, so I'll see you there as well if you're interested. Of course, if you're enjoying this video so far, make sure to like and subscribe. It means a lot to me, really helps the channel grow. Without further ado, let's carry on with this video.
To Oxford, a change in the mentality of the way they operate?
I don't think really at Oxford, no. I hope not. I don't think so.
Who's the smartest thinker you've met in your life?
Oh, gosh.
You've had a moment you sat there and gone, my God, this guy is, or this woman is.
Oh, many times, yes. If you forced me to mention someone, I would say Peter Medawar, Nobel Prize-winning medical scientist.
And what was it about his mind that you found so beguiling?
He was a brilliant scientist, but also a wonderful writer, wonderful, immensely knowledgeable, hugely well-read.
What do you hope to achieve? You're 82 now. You're showing no sign of slowing down. You have a new book, Flights of Fancy, Defying Gravity by Design and Evolution. All about flight. You've written 17 books, I think you told me in one of the breaks. So it's a lot. Do you hope to keep writing books, discussing things?
I do.
Do you have any great unfulfilled ambition?
Well, I'm writing a book at the moment.
What's it about?
It's called The Genetic Book of the Dead. And it's, you want to know what it's about?
Yes.
Okay. Well, if you look at a camouflaged animal, like a lizard in the desert, it's got its environment painted on its back. It's got stones and sand and things. Actually, it's the ancestral environment that's pasted on its back, because it's natural selection of its ancestors that did that. And my point is that is not just skin deep. The whole of the animal, every single little tiny detail of the animal in its interior of every cell will be as precisely a record of ancestral environment as the skin is. So the animal is a description of the world in which its ancestors lived.
Fascinating. I want to come back and ask you one simple question. What is the question that you, Richard Dawkins, would like to have answered before you die? Answer up. Hold your answer after the break.
It's an interesting point, right? It's almost like looking at stars. When you're looking at the light from stars, you're looking at the past instead of the present. And the animals are supposedly the way we are. And perhaps look back at the history of ourselves and our species if you look deep enough inside ourselves.
Welcome back to Piers Morgan Uncensored. I left Richard Dawkins on a cliffhanger, which is, right, what is the question you would most like to get answered?
I think it is there extraterrestrial intelligence? I think I would like to be visited by, well, I will never be visited by actual bodies, I think, but visited by radio waves from another star system.
Do you believe it exists?
Yes. I'm not totally confident, but well, Carl Sagan once said he didn't know, and so he was pressed to say, well, what's your gut feeling? And he said, well, I try not to think with my gut. But yes, I think statistically the odds must be that there is. It might be quite rare. Let's say maybe only 1 billion instances in the universe, and that's very rare indeed, because the number of possible planets is something like 10 to the 22. So 1 billion would be very rare, so rare we might never encounter it. But
what else would you love to know?
Origin of life, the origin of the universe, consciousness. If I were a physicist, I'd want to know how to unify quantum theory and gravity, but I'm not a physicist, so don't ask me about it.
When you saw Professor Stephen Hawking with his black hole discovery and so on, you slightly envious when you see them pull off things like that?
I suppose so, yes. I mean, there's a thing called physics envy.
Yes.
And I sympathize with that. Yes, but I don't have the intellect for that. I don't have the mathematics to do that.
See, what's interesting to me, having spent some time with you, never met you before, you don't seem that, like, provocative or...
Bingo, you got it. I'm not.
Right.
Where did this reputation come from?
I don't know, but I see some of the clips from earlier of you in your more firebrand years.
I get provoked, and people goad me like a bullfighter with a red rag, but I'm...
You don't actually come over that way.
No, I'm a very mild...
Do you feel you get a bad rap?
Yes.
But what's the real Richard Dawkins like then?
Well, I hope I'm polite and
I don't know, maybe if we want to figure out what the real Richard Dawkins is like, I should ask him up to Regent's Park for a cup of tea in Oxford. Maybe that would do well for the channel. But no, I think he's generally a very good guy, and I think a lot of times when you have these debates or stuff like that, religion or like, I mean, you always have people who just become absolutely ridiculous, and everyone's just like trying to kill each other and all that stuff, and that's just a real shame, you know. Reality is a lot of people are just really nice, really genuine people trying to do the best for themselves, and that seems to be what Richard Dawkins is doing, and that's why I said in the start of this interview, I have great respect for him, because that's what he is. He comes off in a very nice way, and he's trying to present his way. And when people are not trying to force a reaction out of you, well, naturally, you're going to be a nice guy, right? I mean, if you're like crazy, like anti-Christian, with no one trying to force a reaction out, then there's going to be a problem. Right here, he's being a nice guy. There doesn't seem to be a problem. Well, all right, let's carry on with the situation. If you got like.
I'm interested and interesting, and I like to talk to people and hear what they have to say.
Are you just incurably logical? Are you basically like a human Spock from Star
I
Trek?
wouldn't like to say that. No, I'm quite emotional as well. I mean, I love poetry and music. And
Are you a romantic person?
I suppose I am, yes.
Can you be logical and romantic? Spock
Yes.
always found that really
I
difficult.
think so, yes.
You can, because isn't it illogical romance, really?
Sort of, yes, it is. But I can be moved to tears by music or poetry.
Do you have a political allegiance to a party?
Well, I voted Lib Dem most of my life.
And some would say that's a weird religion.
Well, I don't feel very strongly about it. I mean, I don't. I'm not a zealot.
Does some of your sort of logical thinking And this may be one of the reasons you get a controversial rap. I was looking into what you said, for example, there's outraged feminists over the years. And it's quite interesting because you said, for example, date rape is bad, stranger rape at knife point is worse, mild paedophilia is bad, violent paedophilia is worse. If you think that's an endorsement of mild paedophilia, go away and learn how to think.
Pure logic.
Right. I understand the logical thinking.
Yes.
But I also understand why a feminist would think, what the hell are you talking about? Rape is rape. It doesn't matter whether it's date rape or knife point rape.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so illogical because what it means is that, I mean, I had a friend who was actually raped in Africa. 3 men pounced on her in a dark alley and 2 of them held her down while they took turns to rape her. Now, that seems to me to be a different order of magnitude to a boyfriend who gets drunk and goes too far. And it seems to me that it's absolute nonsense to say that it's just rape is rape is rape. Of course there are. It's like saying a pickpocket who steals a quid from your pocket is like a bank robber who there are clearly degrees of...
Well, in a way, I would counter and say, I can see your logical mind thinking that. But actually, if you steal £1 or £1 million, you're a thief. If you kill someone, you're a murderer. It doesn't matter how you kill them. And if you're a rapist, you are a rapist. And I can understand why feminists would say, well, hang on, who are you to decide which is more invasive to a woman on a scale of violence?
I actually went on, my next tweet was, stranger rape is bad, date rape is worse. If you think that's an endorsement of stranger rape, go away and think and learn how to think. The point was, go away and learn how to think. If you think that talking about one thing being milder than the other is an endorsement of the milder one, of course it's not.
No, I don't think it's that, but it's more like you're drawing a kind of comparative scale for something where a woman would say, many women would say, that actually rape is rape. It doesn't actually matter how it manifests itself.
I know they would. Let's go back to the stealing a quid from robbing a bank. You're surely not saying that they should have the same jail sentence because theft is theft is theft.
No, but they're all
Why
thieves.
not?
But they're all thieves.
Yes, but so what? They're all thieves.
Well, you wouldn't get the same jail sentence for varying degrees of sexual assault.
Good. That's all I'm saying.
Right, but a woman might say that they can be equally as invasive and terrible for someone's life.
I believe that, yes.
That's possible.
Yes, possible. Yeah.
Your logical mind would allow that thought process.
Yes, and all I said was, if you think that's an endorsement of the mild one, go away and learn how to think.
Have we lost the ability to think logically and critically about things?
Well, some people may have.
Would you sense we have? Everyone's quick to pounce on these kind of things and say, so. I'm outraged.
I think so.
But they haven't really thought through what they're outraged.
Let me take one of the other ones you mentioned, mild paedophilia.
Yeah.
I got hell for that.
Yeah.
I was the victim of mild paedophilia at school. I expect you were. Many people were.
I wasn't, no.
I'm glad to hear it.
You were?
Yes. Now, suppose I had said, this has ruined my life. It's a total catastrophe. Then somebody who really was raped by a priest, say, or by an uncle or something, night after night after night, he would say, how dare you compare your 15 minutes of embarrassment to what I went through night after night after night. That's what I was saying. You get it?
I get your argument. I'm not entirely sure I completely concur with it because I think what you're trying to do is individuals are individuals. They all react to things in different ways. I can imagine there'll be some people who've been through what you went through who would be scarred for life by it if a different type of personality. You clearly say you're not.
Okay. I mean, most of my friends at that school were.
Really?
And we just joked about it.
Because you were at Applethorpe, right?
No, God, no.
Oh,
that's Catholic school.
Which one were you at?
Well, that's not relevant because it's I don't want to mention it.
Right. Have you talked about it before?
Well, I think so, yes.
Yeah.
It's no secret, and it's not a big deal. It's in my autobiography.
Not a big deal, but I mean,
it's in my autobiography.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I can have really conversations like this with people all day long, and I wouldn't be outraged by stuff I hear. I'd want to argue and challenge and get to the bottom of what you're really thinking. But we don't live in that kind of world anymore. People live in soundbite alley.
Yeah, they do.
They just want to pick out a line and then be incensed by it.
Yes.
And we've also got a culture of just general victimhood, I think, in society. People.
And that's a very dangerous thing, the victim mentality. That's something I've always preached on this channel and always thought about across all my channels. No matter what situation you are, the moment you become resentful, the moment you play the victim, you're always going to be worse off. You're always going to lose for yourself and for society. That's always going to lose. So you always have to fight against it. That's something I've always preached on this channel. Let's watch the end of this video.
Want to be a victim. They want to play a victim. They want to play that victimhood card because they think it's something that now gets celebrated and can be rewarding, actually, for some people.
I think that's true.
That's different to how society used to be.
I think that's true, yes.
Are we going the wrong way?
Well, if you're right, yes.
Do you think I'm right?
I think you probably are.
You know who Dr. Spock is, right?
Yes, I do.
He was Mr. Logical.
Yeah, I know. Yes, I know.
Do you not think you're the human manifestation of him?
No.
What's the one thing you'd like to achieve now in the rest of your life?
Well, I think I'd like to be known for science and for helping people to understand science, for understanding science myself, and not known for being vehement and an atheist, which is only 2 of my books.
You've got a chance to write your own headstone. Here lies Richard Dawkins. He...
I think I'd maybe copy Jacques Monod, the great biologist. He said, je cherche à comprendre. I'd seek to understand.
Well, I sought to understand. I think I understand you a lot better after meeting you. Richard Dawkins, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it very much. That's it from me. Whatever you're up to, keep it uncensored and like Richard Dawkins. Keep asking questions.
That seems like a wonderful interview. Hopefully you enjoyed the interview as much as I did. I haven't watched this before, so this was a genuine, intuitional reaction to the situation. So I hope you've enjoyed it. If you enjoyed these videos and want more, then let me know in the comments below. Happy to discuss them with you there. Stay safe, my friends. See you soon. Thank you for watching, and goodbye. I will see you in the next one, I suppose. Well, have a great one, my friends.